Okay, so last time we implemented some ajax, which meant that when we create a new to-do, it didn't refresh the page, it just updated the table. So just to show you this again, if I add another to-do here, let's call it 3. I push enter and that fires an ajax request which inserts this new to-do into our database and just updates this area. Remember, we were trying to recreate the functionality of the Trello to-do list. Previously, to add a new to-do, we had to go to a different page, a create page, type in all the details, click create, and then it redirected us back to this page. So this is what we've got now. Let's have a look on our list of targets and see what we've got left to do. So we've got users should only be able to edit their own to-do items. Users should be able to mark items as complete. Style should change, and there should be a percentage completed indicator. So what we're going to work on today is this one here. Users should be able to mark items as complete. At the moment, if I wanted to set this one as complete, I'd have to click Edit, click Is Done here, and click Save, and then that would take, that's done it. These here aren't actually like selectors. I can't click on these, and they're not interactable. Interactable, and that's how you say it. What we want is this kind of functionality where I click on the list, I click on the checkbox, and it updates the server. There's some ajax going on that updates this table, much like how I can just add new items with this text box. So let's get started. Let's stop this running. Now the way we're going to do this is we're going to do it using jQuery, and we're going to change these into actual interactable selectors, and we're going to add event listeners to them that are going to listen for when we change the value. And when we change the value, that's going to fire off events, an ajax call that basically works the same way as this text box. But we're not going to be creating a new item, we're just going to be editing an existing one. So as always, it's difficult to figure out where to start. I think the easiest place to start probably is going to be by first changing these from displays to actually interactable items. So if I go up to the to-do table here, and this is what builds, this is our partial view that builds the table that we see in there. And we can see we've got display for model item is done. This is the one we want to change. I'm going to change this to checkbox 4. And that will, so now what will happen if I run it again? My to-do list. Right, now we have checkboxes, but these checkboxes, they don't do anything. They're just checking. They don't do, yeah, that's all they do. There's no functionality. I can uncheck this. It doesn't actually change the value for this to do. So we need to add that using some jQuery. And right, I think what we're going to do is, like we did last time, I'm going to build the controller function first. So the jQuery is going to fire an ajax request. So remember we made this ajax stuff here, which sent. This is what happens when we want to build the table the first time that the document loads. So on the document load, it sends a request to this URL, and then that URL returns the partial view of this table, and it puts it in table div, which is in our index, which is here. I'm going to put a space there to make it a bit clearer. So it puts it in this table div. So we want to do the same kind of thing. So the first thing we need is a controller action to actually perform the logic. So let's go to our to-dos controller. Now the thing we're going to be changing is, or the thing we're going to be using, this is basically going to be an edit. So I'm going to look at the edit method that's already here. So this is the edit method that is used by, we go to that, the one I showed at the start, where we go to another page. And so it's expecting you to give it a to-do. It changes that particular to-do in the database if needed, and then saves the changes and redirects to the index. So let's do this. In this case, we're not using a form, so I can't, or it'd be too complicated to sort out the validation for the anti-forgery token. So I'm gonna, well, too complicated for this tutorial. There are ways you could do it manually, but that's a bit beyond us at the moment. So we're going to call this, I'm going to call it Ajax capitals because that's what we called the Ajax create. So it's going to be Ajax edit. I'm going to change, we're not actually going to be using the model binding in this case, because again, we're not using a form. What I'm going to be doing is sending, what I want to do, the way I'm thinking is going to be best, is that we have, so the user could click on, I could click on this one, this checkbox, but at the moment all these checkboxes are the same element. They're not, if I look at this, view tools, developer tools, let's find them. It's going to be in here, in the table, here. Let's pick this one. So yeah, so here you can see this is the actual R checkbox. Now there's nothing to tell us that there's any difference. This checkbox and this checkbox are the same. There's no way of knowing that this checkbox is associated with this particular to-do. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some parameters to the attributes in here. So I'm going to change this attribute where it says ID. In fact, let's do that now. It's probably going to be clearer if we do that now. So what? I'll leave this as it is. So we're going to go to the to-do table. So we're creating this checkbox here. Now, all helpers, you can add another argument, which is the HTML parameters, or attributes, sorry, the HTML attributes that this thing that the helper is creating going to have. And so what we're going to do is, much like here, we're going to do ID equals item.id. So when it makes this checkbox, it's going to give it the ID that this has. And remember, the ID is the primary key. But I'm also, actually no, that's all I'm going to do for now. Yeah, that's all we need for right now. Oh, excuse me. So in this function, we're going to, the first argument is we're going to take the ID. So very similar to up there. This is how the function is going to know which to do you're changing. And then we're going to we also need to give it a value. And this is going to be the value that we want to set our isDone to. So we're going to start out, we probably should have gone from this one actually. I'm going to copy this code here, because this is basically what we're doing. So I'm going to copy that code there, and I'm going to replace it in here. Right, so we pass this controller action. It's squiggly line because we're not returning a view yet, which is fine. So we'll do that in a minute. So we've got the Ajax edit, and that's taking two arguments: the ID of the to-do item that we're changing, and the value we want isDone changed to. And then what this code does is it has a look. Firstly, if you don't provide it with an ID, it returns a bad request error. Then it tries to find the to-do that's with the ID that we gave it. If it doesn't find one, it returns a HTTP not found, else we want to do something. So else we want to set to-do, which is the one we got from the database here. Remember, DB is our database context, which is a private field parameter here. So DB is our application DB context. So we want to set to-do dot is done equals value. Okay, because we might be changing it from done to not done, right? That's valid. Then we want to kind of do this again, right? So we're then doing this, where we have a look, and what this does is this modifies the entry. So it puts this entry in, it looks at to-do, it modifies it, and then it saves the changes. Okay, that's what these lines do here, which I took from this edit action that was put in here by the scaffolding. And then we want to, whatever happens, we still want the table. Well, we don't actually need to update the table unless it works. So return partial. Well, no, we've got to. Sorry. So we're going to return partial view, and then we're going to do it the same way that we've done it in these other Ajax. When the Ajax create, is we're going to be returning just the table. So let's go through what's happening. So we're going to click one of these. What I want to happen is this. When I click this, I want an event to be fired that calls this controller action. And this controller action is going to, the event, when the event fires, I'm going to have somehow figured out what the ID of this to-do is. And that's going to be passed to this action along with the value that I set it to. So because I clicked like that, the value will now be true. So it's going to take that value true. We've got a couple of error check steps here. It's very unlikely that there'll be an error because the table is, you can only get to this unless, the only way you would get an error from this probably, you never know, is if you try to navigate to this URL on your own and just put in random numbers, because the ID will have come from our actual table. So if this doesn't, if we end up here or here, then there's a bug in our code, basically. I mean, what you should be doing is you should be returning a better, you could return a partial view that has some kind of error message in it. A meaningful error message would be a better way, perhaps. But for now, this is fine. So we check to see if the ID is even there. If it is, we find the to-do with that ID. If it's null, that means we didn't find it. We return a HTTP not found. Otherwise, well, in fact, this is returning it, so it will end up in that, probably we want to do like that. No. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so this will work. In fact, yeah. So in the case that it's broken, you're going to get, it'll redirect to a HTTP not found or whatever. Whereas here, assuming that everything went well, we correctly picked a to-do and found it in our database, then we set the value of isDone to the value that was input to this action. We update the database, save it, and then return the partial view, which is this table here. And then that'll go back to the JavaScript, the jQuery, and the Ajax, and it will replace table div with the new updated table with everything saved and nice. Okay, hopefully, now I've said that a few times, you're kind of following. When it's all working, I'm sure you'll see what's going on. So, what we're going to need is another JavaScript script. So let's add I right click to get this menu up, by the way. JavaScript file, and let's call it add checkbox listeners. Hopefully that's about right. Listener. Yep. Okay, so we've got add checkbox listener. Add checkbox listener. I'm going to put that up there. Now we're going to be doing this using jQuery. So first we need to check the document's loaded. It should, like, the way that when this no, well, it might not. So we should always do this, right? You always start any jQuery with this, because if the document isn't loaded, it's not going to be able to add. It won't find the elements that you want, and it won't be able to add these events to them. Now, to be able to add an event listener to an element, we need to be able to identify that element, and that's something we haven't done yet. If we go here, and the way you identify things would be by the HTML attributes. So what we can do is we can actually give all of these boxes a class, which is a CSS selector class. So I'm going to say class equals, I'm going to call it active check. Okay, and that way it's only these checkboxes that are created here that will have this. Maybe there's somewhere else we want a checkbox, and we don't want the this function to be, this event listener, put on there. So let's do $. The first thing you do in any jQuery, the first argument here is basically a way of searching for all the elements you want. So in this case, I want all elements that have the class active check. So it's point active check. Dot change. Now what this will do is it means we're going to be firing a function if the value of this entity changes, this element. So then when this happens, it's going to fire a function which we define now. And what do we want this function to do? Well, the first thing is we want to get a reference to the actual element itself. So you do that by this self equals jQuery this. So this would be like this keyword is the thing that fired this function. So you're getting the this is like the jQuery object that refers to the thing that fired it. That might not have made sense, but it'll make sense now when I do this. Okay, so now we want the ID. We need the ID. Now we stored the ID here in the attribute ID. So we can do that by we can get that by self.attribute attra, and we're looking for the ID. Okay, so that will be the ID of the to-do. We then need the value. So then is it true or false? Is self.prop and it's checked is the property for a checkbox. So is it checked or not? This will be true if it's checked and false if it's not. So we've got the values we want, and now we want to do an ajax request to update the database, and then put the table back in the table div to update it. So I'm going to get this on the screen so we can see the function we're trying to call. And so it's dot ajax, it's a little ajax, and okay, so the URL is going to be to-dos, because it's in the to-dos controller. And it's ajax edit. And then what we can do is this is going to be a post HTTP request, and to do that in Ajax we need to tell it what data to send with this request. So we have the data, which is what this will be like a set of name value pairs. So ID equals ID, and then value is value. Cool. So that's corresponding to these. So the but what's going to happen is .NET will see these values are in the header of the request, and it will make these as the arguments for this function when it calls it. So now we want the type of request is post, and we want a function to run on success function, and then basically it's where is it? It's going to be this. So I'm going to just copy and paste that. Right. That, let's yeah, that's all in one. So this function, this Ajax, is part of the function that's in that we've this. It's sometimes hard to see when the formatting. So that is. So we're adding an event listener to all of the checkboxes that have active check as their class, which we set up in the table. So we set @class active check. On change, it's going to call this function. And the function is all of this down here. It's going to do all of that. So it's going to firstly get a reference to itself, find the ID from the HTML attribute that we set here, find the value from just the property of the element because it's a checkbox, and then once it's got those, it's going to do an Ajax request to this URL. It's going to do a post, HTTP post. That's going to call this function Ajax edit. Remember, the routing system is going to look at this URL and convert that into a controller and action, and it's going to call this method. Now, these data, the arguments come from the data that we sent with this request, which are named paired values, right? So ID, ID, value, value, which we got from here. They'll go in there. This will then run, and it will update the database with how we've changed the value of ToDo, and then return a partial view, which, remember, a partial view is just HTML. It's just going to look at this. It's not going to apply any kind of layout. It's just going to create this table, and it's going to return that to the Ajax call, and it'll end up as this thing result. And on success, this Ajax function, once this is all done, it's going to change the HTML of table div, which is in our index, remember here, and set that to result. Okay? That's what should happen. And hopefully, oh, okay, I almost forgot something. This script currently isn't being run anywhere. So nothing would, this is just not ever going to happen. Now I'm going to put a reference to this script in the table itself, and I'll tell you why in a minute. So script source, and it's in custom scripts. There we go. Now I'm adding this script to the table, the partial view, because I want these event listeners to be added anytime we create this table. If I put this script in the index file with all my others, then this would only be run the first time the page loads. Each time any kind of Ajax happens and the table is updated, it would be new elements, and those elements wouldn't have the event listeners attached to them. So we need to run this every time the table's updated, which is why we put it in this partial view. So hopefully that makes sense. And hopefully this works. So let's run. It seems to have built, so that's a good sign. So what I'm actually going to do with this is I'm going to open the console and watch that. to see if anything. Let's go to the console. I don't know what that is. That means right. So if I click that, I didn't get any error here, so that's a good thing. So okay, Ajax entry I've set to is done. So if I go back to application, my to-do list, it's set as is done still. That's good. So if I set it, let's turn them all off. So I've unset them. Now I'm going to add another to-do, and that's going to refresh the table. So if our stuff works, that shouldn't change, which it isn't, which is good. So what happens if I click all these and add 5? Okay, it seems to be, it's working, right? Cool. So that works. But you can see, obviously, this is a much better, like, for the user than the original, what we had to do originally, which was click, like, edit, you know, click on this and go back to the list. And that's showing you, like, the scaffolding that the entity framework will do for you is really good. But it's very basic, and you need to change that. Now, if you're actually someone on my course, like, I'm really going to expect you to change this stuff and to think about the things I've done so far in this video tutorial and how you might be able to use those kind of ideas. So, right, card on. So, can we click? Is my connection off or something? No. So, users should be able to mark items complete. Right, that one's done. Page shouldn't refresh. That one's done. Users should only be able to edit their own to-do items. Now, let's get rid of that. There's one way we can do that now is if I stop this. The only way that a user can so what we need to do I'm trying to think the best way to do this. We're still going to want, here's the question, do we want users to be able to edit the text here? I think probably we do. Oh, it's not working because I've turned this off. It's missing something. Right. Is there? There we go, that's better. Is there one here? Right. Okay. Can a user edit someone else's to-dos? That's the question. Because what I was thinking, you don't know what I was thinking, so you don't know what on earth I'm going on about, is that we could just get rid of these edit methods and not allow a user to edit things through there. But if they do want to edit the text, maybe we do want to let them do this. What we could do is we could add a check here if we wanted to, right? We could add a check to see if, well, let's do that. Let's not be lazy, right? We want to know, let's get the current user in. We only need to do it in this first edit. So notice how we have two edit methods. So basically, this first edit method is what gets fired. I'll show you. My to-do list. So when I click edit, if you look at the URL down in the bottom corner, right? I don't have two mouse pointers. So you can see it says the URL it's going to is to-dos edit 8. So I click that, and it does it. It's firing this version of the action. This is an overloaded version, which runs when there's a post request when I click save. So if we can add a check here to see if the current user is the current user. and we'll do that. That shouldn't be too hard. So string current user. Let's get the current user. Edit. Right, so we need to get to the point where we need to actually, so I'm going to do it here. We need to see, firstly, have we even got a to-do? So if we've got a to-do, we get the current user, and, well, actually, no, we first want to see if it's null. So the first thing we do is, does it exist in the first place? Now, if it does exist, we're going to check if to-do.user not, well, actually what we're going to do is we're going to do .id. How do we do this? Let's do it user not equal current user. Then we're going to return a bad request. Okay, we'll see if this works. I'm not sure if we can check equality like this with the users. We'll see. My to-do list, edit. Okay, that's worked. So now if I copy this URL, log off, and paste it. There we go. We've got a bad request. Because in that case, I'm not the current user because I'd logged out. So it didn't let me, the form didn't